Hello, Ira.
Hello, Marshall. How are you tonight?
Fine, fine. How are you tonight?
So far, so good. You are on Late Night in the Midlands. We are live, and I would love to welcome you here. It has been very. I've been looking forward to this conversation very much all week.
Well, hi, and it's good to be back. I think Michael interviewed me many years ago.
He mentioned that he had had you on at least
Hello?
once before. Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. There was just a little dead space there.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, there is. I think the Skype got a little bit delayed there. It kind of lagged for a moment. We should be good though now. So if you don't mind, go ahead and.
Are we on the air yet?
Yep, we are live. We are live and on the air.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind, let's start off by maybe telling a little bit of your backstory so that people can get an understanding of where you're coming from and what you're all about.
Okay, thank you. This all started back in 47 when I entered Caltech as a freshman in the fall of September of that year. In the summer of that, an incident occurred at Roswell, New Mexico called the UFO incident, which I think everybody's familiar with. So, of course, the buzzword on campus was that we wanted to know were there aliens, what's a UFO, and we couldn't quit talking about it. It was like the only subject that really held forward. So anyway, I was blessed at Caltech to have two outstanding professors. One was Richard Feynman in physics, and the other was Linus Pauling in chemistry. During the course of my junior year, I really was compelled to ask them the following questions. I asked Richard Feynman if he believed in UFOs, and I asked Pauling if he believes in God. This is really where it started for me, and their answers stayed with me for over 65 years. I published it in my first book called Adam and the Missing Link, the answers to those questions. And after I graduated Caltech in 1951, I went into a business career for 30 and retired. And I went into around the trip world and became very interested in going back and doing something. So I had another career, but I was always curious with the answers I got from Pauling and Feynman. Are we alone? Is there a God? And then I was blessed with the third teacher. In 1999, I picked up a book called The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin, and that opened the door for me to understand the answers that I needed to pursue the course that I'm now pursuing, which is the history of the Anunnaki. I've written 4 books about that. The first one was Adam the Missing Link. The second one was Gilgamesh 10. The third one was the Anunnaki Were Here. And my current book, called The Mysteries of Alien Technology, sums up my luminous research into this very fascinating subject. I guess that's my background.
I've definitely read all of Sitchin's books myself over the years, and I find them to be fascinating. Even if I don't necessarily agree with everything that I read in them, I definitely find them to be fascinating, and I love the topic of it, and I love the ideas that are contained within it. So, now you said that your book is Adam and the Missing Link. Your Skype kind of cut out just slightly on that, so it's Adam and the
Yes,
Missing Link.
Adam the Missing Link, which was the subject of where we came from. And I asked Zecharia, I know after reading The 12th Planet, I pursued the rest of his books, as you probably did. I said, your books are very scholarly, Zecharia. They're very intense, and most people I don't think are going to get the answer that they need. So would you mind if I published your theory, the Sitchin theory, of that stuff you translated for us, in an 8.5 by 11 format, kind of like Life magazine with lots of pictures in it? He said, sure, Marshall, go ahead. As long as you say and use any of my material with permission by Zecharia Sitchin, then I give you permission. So my 10-year relationship with Zecharia started there. and he had a wonderful. He was my teacher. I was a student, and the answers that came to me were not necessarily the ones that he always came up with, but I would be able to use him as a sounding board as I progress forward.
I would definitely have loved to have been able to pick his brain, on a personal basis, one-to-one basis. That would have been amazing, a definitely amazing experience.
That was a joy. It was a joy to me.
I would agree. I would love to do that myself. Listen, actually, let me go ahead and hang up with you on Skype here real quick and call you right back and see if we can get a little bit of a better connection going. For some reason, it's
okay.
Cutting out just a little bit. Let's give it another shot. Skype does that sometimes, So let me go ahead and hang up with you here real quick, and I'll call you right back.
Thank you.
Folks, be patient with us. We're going to see if we can get a better connection going here with him. And I know it's a little bit of a difficulty, but, it's live radio. So sometimes Skype will do a little bit of a bad connection, and we have to just kind of reset and give it another try.
Hello, Ira.
Hello there, Marshall. Okay, let's see if that's any better. We can go on with the conversation from here.
No, you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, great. So, with Adam and the Missing Link, why don't we start there a little bit, I guess? And what was your process when you first started off with that, thinking, I'm going to write this book? What do I want to have in it? Kind of like your basis of study with it all, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I found fascinating was the story that Zecharia Sitchin had translated from the cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals, and it was such a fascinating story. I was able to reproduce the pictures of the cylinder seals and the cuneiform tablets and explain how he unraveled the cosmology of the Sumerians. You see, the history in the cuneiform tablets is that really the history of Sumerian civilization, which was the first civilization that appeared on planet Earth with writing. They wrote down their story on these cuneiform tablets, which were discovered in the sands of Iraq around 1820. And they started translating them, and they discovered that they were the history of mankind before the Bible. So my subtitle for Adam the Missing Link was The New Story of the Creation of Mankind, because it does reveal some facts that are fascinating that aren't in the Bible. Everybody thinks the Bible is the history of civilization, of us, Homo sapiens, but it isn't. There were thousands of years of history before the Bible that Zecharia was able to reveal to us by his translations. So in that first book, with over 70 pictures, I was able to show how he developed, what he developed, what physical evidence is on this planet. I published 14 major stone monuments that prove that there was a technology here that was way beyond that of early man, Stone Age man, and that there must have been a civilization that colonized this planet over 400,000 years ago. And as the Sumerians said, they called themselves the Anunnaki. And that story is spelled out in the first book.
So a big question here would be, what in your thoughts and in your research have you been able to figure out as far as what exactly are the Anunnaki, and do they have anything to do with what is like commonly thought? Because so many people come in to this topic with so many preconceived ideas about the Anunnaki, and there is a lot of disinformation that's out there regarding it. So what is what are your thoughts on it?
But, okay, the part about that technology that the Anunnaki had was so advanced that they were able to transmit through the clay tablets and a thing called cylinder seals. A cylinder seal is a 1-inch tall piece of stone that's been ground into a cylinder shape, and then engraved in the outside surface are negative images, so that when you roll the stone, which is made of hematites, as hard as steel, so it's very difficult to carve in a negative or carve in any way. You roll this negative image across a piece of clay, you get a picture story. And in that way, they were able to show what they looked like. In other words, these are valuable information transfers to us that show physically pictures of what they were doing and what they, and therefore I think that the story, as concise as I can put it, was, according to Sitchin, that over 400,000 years ago they came to this planet and colonized it. Their planet was captured into our solar system. It was free floating in space, and it came by Neptune's gravitational field and pulled it in into Sitchin clockwise. And as it passed through the center, it collided with the fourth planet, which was called in the translations, and cut it in half. And then it went out into a 3,600-year orbit way out past the Oort belt and comes back every 3,600 years and repeats the path, which is between Jupiter and Mars. And in that collision, since this fat, watery planet Tiamat lost half of its mass, it created a new orbit. It became the third planet from the sun, which is our Earth. And if you drained all the water off the planet, you'll see there's a big hole in the Pacific Ocean where the results of this collision. So they were an advanced civilization. They probably were 9 feet tall, according to the translations. They were humanoid looking, and they, according to the pictures that we see of them on the cylinder seals, and their planet had a problem. It's like a spaceship that goes way out past the sun, and they had burned a hole in their ozone, in their atmosphere. They created an ozone leak, and they were losing their atmosphere. And they tried all means and manners to preserve themselves, because if they lost their atmosphere, their civilization had been kaput, as it were. So they discovered that flaking gold into the ozone leak would seal it, help heal it. The sun would reflect out of it, and it would heal itself. And they didn't have any gold on their planet. The mission was come to Earth. They did a survey of the inner planets and found that we had gold. And their mission was they came to planet Earth to retrieve gold to send back to their home planet, which was called Nibiru, to seal the leak in the ozone and save their civilization. There were 50 heroes that arrived in the first spaceship, and the story is fascinating. I repeat parts of it, and most of it in the 4 books. Continues on throughout the 400,000 years since they first landed on Earth. That's basically the story.
Well, to me, it's a definite fascinating story. I love the idea in it, and I'm a big science fiction fan. I'll just say that right away. So, it definitely always has fascinated me just from the beginning when I heard it years ago. It got me kind of started in a pathway of examining what our history really is. And, regardless of whether or not people really understand this or not, we human beings have been lied to all along about who and what we really are. And there's no doubt about that.
That's true.
There really is no doubt about that. What we are, who we are,
right.
We may not really know for sure or be able to say 100% certainty, but we can at least know that much of it. So I find that, yes, the idea of...
It's like all my life.
Go
all my
ahead.
life I was searching for that answer, Ira. I wanted to know who we were and where we came from. Now, there's certain answers I was able to dig up out of these deciphering of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals, and it helped solve my problems. And the one remaining problem, which I don't think anybody's ever going to solve, is, where did it all come from? Where did the universe from? Where did the Anunnaki come from? Who created the Anunnaki? Those are still unanswered questions.
Do you think that we're ever going to find out? I guess that'd be a good question.
That's a good question, Ira. I hope so, but as I studied the civilization that they had. You know, in the translations that Zecharia gave us, there's a lot of history of the Anunnaki back on their home planet and how to solve their problems and so forth. But the one thing that's really stuck in my head is that if indeed they are a million years more advanced than we are, they still didn't answer all the questions because a deity called the creator of all. In other words, they don't know where the universe, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think they know where the universe came from, and they have certain rules that they abide by, and those rules are some of the rules that we've been given in our civilization.
Okay, we're really having a lot of Skype issues tonight. I don't know what it is, if it's something that's on your end, or maybe you have like some storms or something that are going on in between. It's so robotic and really kind of hard to understand. Would I be able to call you back on like your landline for a little while? And maybe
we could try it on my landline.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Ira,
why don't we go ahead and do that? Because it's definitely been hard to get the full grasp. I mean, it's such a great subject and conversation. I would hate for anybody to listen.
Are you hearing me?
Oh yeah, we're hearing you, but it's like every 30 or 40 seconds or so you'll cut out for about a second or two, or maybe even 3, and it kind of gets really garbled up, basically. So.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and I'll hang up here and I'll call you right back on your phone then.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I sure can. That's a lot better, actually. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So let's. I'm sorry about that. I know that Skype is usually better, but I don't know if it's something that's on your end or if it's something on my end. But we'll just go with this, and hopefully this will be a lot better for everybody. So.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
You're welcome.
Okay, so one question then that I would have, I guess, is when you were talking about like the Tiamat being destroyed, and that
Yes.
it basically became so you were saying that when Tiamat was destroyed, it basically the leftovers of it became what we now know as Earth.
Earth and the asteroid belt. In other words, the debris became the asteroid belt, and some of it went clockwise out as the comets. In other words, a very strange thing about the Sitchin translation was that he definitely said that it came in clockwise, Nibiru that is, and it keeps circling around the sun clockwise, and all the planets, all of us go counterclockwise around the sun, so that when the collision occurred, the debris became the asteroid belt, which hangs out between Mars and Jupiter. But there was still some more debris that went out clockwise, and that became the comets. They go all the way out to the Oort belt and beyond and come back in. So that kind of explains some astronomical things that people never before really understood. And I think he's brought a breath of fresh air into that discipline.
I would agree with that, definitely. I mean, if nothing else, it brings a new energy to the whole discussion. And we can kind of, like I said, I mean, I know that a lot of people out there, they I don't know, I guess a guy like Sitchin kind of always falls into two camps. Everybody either loves him or they hate him. There's not really much that's in between, you know? And,
well, I think those people who are the naysayers are probably wanting to make a name for themselves based on his popularity. He's a very popular author. And I think that if you dig into the essence of the theory, it's solid. There's everything seems to support it. And I agree with you. There are those who are naysayers about the theory, but I don't think they have any grounds to base their opinions on that hold any water at all. I've faced into that many times in my interviews.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. When you associate yourself with somebody like him, you kind of always take on the same enemies, I guess you could say. I don't really want to use that word, but you no. Understand what I mean. And
no, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
When okay, so let's see. So with the Tiamat situation, this would have happened, I mean, ages ago, long
maybe
ago.
400. No, let's see. Our solar system was born about 4.5 billion years ago, and in some time after that, this planet was captured. We never really knew exactly. He was unable to pinpoint when it came into our solar system, but the fact that it's here, and there have been 10 civilizations that have seen it and reported it, the last one being the Greeks. 3,600 years is a long time for something to reappear in your sky. But when it does, it causes all kinds of havoc. There's earthquakes, there's tidal waves, there's all kinds of gravitational forces, because it's a pretty large body that comes past Jupiter and between Mars and goes around the sun and then whips itself back out into its orbit. So the Greeks named it Nemesis. And the interesting thing, Ira, was that there was a period of time between the Greeks and the Romans, and now, where the Romans never reported it. And I often asked Zecharia, I said, you think there was a reason? He said, well, they were involved in other things. And I said, like what? He said, well, perhaps the Star of Bethlehem. And I said, aha. So if the thing in the sky that is referred to in the Bible as the Star of Bethlehem could have been Nibiru, and they called it something else to support the new religion. That's possible.
That is definitely a possibility. When it comes to all of these different things, I always hear people say, well, that, couldn't happen or anything like that. But for me, unless it has been completely disproven 100%, you have to at least still have it within the realm of possibility.
The physical evidence, and particularly, I've been examining for many years now the vast body of physical evidence that's here on planet Earth that's unexplainable. The pyramids, for example.
Which I know that you speak about. You have actually a theory as far as the pyramids are concerned that I would love to hear about, and I think that everybody would really find fascinating.
Well, in my third book, by the way, my books are available at my website, or if your folks are interested, it's www.adamthemissinglink.com.
Which we do have that linked up on the website, lnmradionetwork.com. And that will be there with the archives as well, so it's going to be a permanent link existing forever. So,
well, by the time I had examined so many of these objects on the Earth, particularly like the step pyramids in Mesoamerica, I said there had to be a purpose for building the structures the way they were built. And I came up with a theory which was called the washboard gold mining theory. Now, when the excuse me, the coughs come back. When the flood occurred in 11,000 years ago, the Anunnaki had been mining gold in Southeast Africa in the traditional fashion, which is digging it, going down under the earth and processing it. Those mines were closed up by the mud from the flood and left them without a source. So I think they turned to the placer water. Nature has a way in the spring runoff of stripping the veins of gold and putting them into the river waters as placer gold, or little fine particles of gold. And these can be collected, excuse me, with a washboard system like they did in the gold fields in the 49ers in California. So if you look at a step pyramid, it's kind of like a washboard. And then I went to Machu Picchu, and I looked at that complex, and it's just a ton of washboards. There's terraces all over the places. And the more that I looked at the terraces and the more that I thought about it, there's a river that runs around Machu Picchu called the Hurumbaba River, filled with placer gold. All they had to do was pump it up to the top and let it flow over these terraces. And since gold is 19 times heavier than water, it'll drop out and land on the terraces, and all they had to do is collect it.
Made their jobs pretty easy, I bet. It made that job pretty easy, I bet.
Yeah, well, in my last book, the mysteries of alien technology, I put forward a secondary backup system. I often wondered, well, okay, they got all this gold to land on those terraces. How'd they pick it up? I discovered that in ancient times in Russia, a place called Sochi, they were collecting gold out of the river by putting sheepskin in the water and letting the sheepskin collect the lanolin. The lanolin on the sheepskin fibers adhered, the plaster particles adhered to it. And there was a myth called Jason and the Golden Fleece.
Aha.
And I said, well, what was the Golden Fleece? Well, it's pictured there. There's a statue of Medina, Princess Medina, holding up a sheepskin that's golden. I said, bingo! That was the collection method. They had to have pelts on these horizontal surfaces that were collecting the plaster particles, and then they dry them out, and they got their gold that way.
Now, see, that falls into something that I've said for many years, that as far as mythology is concerned, there is always a grain of truth to it. There's something to it.
Lots of truth. There's lots of truth in those myths, Ira.
Exactly.
Really,
and they didn't have maybe an understanding of how to describe, in scientific terms, how we would understand it today. But if we can break down what their language was, what their original context of information was, then maybe we can actually have an understanding of what the mythology behind all of it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as I pointed out, the first chapter of the last book, Mysteries of Alien Technology, is called The Golden Fleece. And I repeat the myth, and I show how that system worked. And then I said, well, there were hundreds of thousands of surfaces that needed to be covered with sheep pelts in order to make that system work. So I asked myself, well, where did they get all those pelts from? And I put together a system of, Mary, the system of stone circles in Southeast Africa. He's a guy named Michael Tillinger. I think you've probably heard of him.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, he's been writing books and describing these hundreds of thousands of stone circles. Well, I did a little research, and one of the chief characters of the Anunnaki is called Enki, and he's described as the god of the water, but also as the master of the sheepfolds. I said, well, what the heck's a sheepfold? And I looked it up in Google, and sure enough, sheepfolds are ancient circular stone walls in which sheep are bred. So I said, aha, bingo. Here we've got these places which I discovered were not only in South Africa, but they also exist in Syria and in Israel, the Golden Heights, and also over in Peru. These are all gold mining areas. And they raised these sheep without shepherds out into the fields. Excuse me a minute.
No problem. For those of you wondering, he just got back from a big set of conferences, did a lot of talking, and so his throat is a little dry and sore.
Yeah. Well, I met with Michael up at the Contact in the Desert last weekend. We had a big seminar of UFO people, and I discussed it with him. He said, amazingly, in all of his searching around in those circles, he never saw any snakes. I said, well, excuse me, according to your theory, there were kind of vibrating stones in these walls, high-frequency stones, and I said they were probably meant to keep the predators out. That answered that question.
That does definitely make sense. Do you think maybe it was something in the stones itself that had like this kind of vibrational quality? Or?
Yeah, they were definitely high frequency stones. He's written books about it, and he's tried to figure out what the frequencies did. And I said, well, today we raise sheep out in our sheep pens are square, but they have electronic fences around them, electrified fences to keep the predators out. So if these folks, of course, didn't have that available to them, they discovered that if they put these vibrating stones with a high frequency, that they could tune it to keep predators away from the sheep. They didn't have to have a bunch of shepherds.
Well, and to go with that as well, this falls into something that I've thought over the years, and I don't know what maybe your thoughts on this are, but we see a lot of these different structures that are around, like the sheepfolds and such, like Stonehenge, where there are large stones standing on top of other stones, and perhaps there is a feature of piezoelectricity that is happening from the weight of the stones being on top of each other, and perhaps they were able to figure out that a certain amount of weight put on top of it would cause this kind of a feature to end up emerging from these stones.
There you go. That's a theory that's worth investigating. I mean, you know, there are mysteries out there, Ira, and you have to kind of think outside the box and put it all together. So my washboard gold mining theory now is kind of completed its circle. They took the placer water from the rivers as nature was stripping the gold. They ran it over a washboard surface, and they put a collection method called sheepskins on the horizontal surfaces, and were able to get tons of gold that way.
Now,
it
one
all
question
makes sense to me.
It does to me too, actually, and I love the idea because it does go far to explaining maybe what the purpose of the different pyramid structures and why we see certain things that are associated.
To make pretty structures. I think they all had a function.
Yeah.
Everything that they built had a function. Now, the
most definitely
interesting of all was inside the Great Pyramid. I do a piece in my last book that shows that the internal mechanism of the Great Pyramid, which every scholar has put his brain to try to figure out what was going on in there. In my opinion, since they were designed to be watertight, everything in it, all the passages and the chambers and the Grand Gallery are watertight. There had to be a reason for it. And in my book, I explained how the hydraulic pulse pump works, which they would get water up into the king's chamber and surging back and forth in the Grand Gallery. And if you look at the Grand Gallery, it's an upside-down washboard. It's a cobalt ceiling, which is an upside-down washboard. And they could collect gold inside, in my opinion, of the Great Pyramid. So I put that forward, and I looked for a smoking gun, and I found one. There's a sarcophagus in the king's chamber, beautiful piece of granite, where the inside is so perfect that you can't imagine how it was machined. But there's a glaring problem with the box. Have you seen pictures of it?
I have, yes.
All the outside edges are damaged.
Yeah.
The top edges, the side edges, the bottom edges. And according to Archimedes' principle, if water got into the king's chamber, that box would float. And if the pulsing action of the hydraulic pump caused it to go up and down, it would sluice around and bang into the walls and the ceiling and damage the box. And one corner got so severely damaged that water finally got in the box and it sunk, sitting where it came down. So
and for that's
my smoking gun to my my washboard gold mining theory in the Great Pyramid.
And for those who aren't aware as well, the hydraulic pumps that you're discussing there, they're not hard to make. They're really not hard to do. I mean, they do it in very primitive areas right here and now.
Well, before there was electricity, that's how they pump water.
Right, exactly. And it's not difficult to do. They do that around the world now in areas that don't have electricity in order to get water out of the ground. It's a pretty simple principle, really.
Yeah, well, a guy named John Cadman did a thing on it, and I published some of his stuff in that last book, and it's really beautiful how they built a wall around the base of the pyramid, flooded it with Nile River water, which contained tons of placer gold from the spring runoff in the Nubian gold fields, and got the water to rise up to the entrance, which is, above ground, 30-some feet above ground, and then the descending passage gets shot down into the pit, and the hydraulic pump went into action, and it surged up into the Grand Gallery, and as it surged back and forth. I have diagrams. I mean, it's hard for me to explain with words how that relates. If you buy my books, you will look in these pictures. They're big color pictures of how that works, and I think the whole thing makes sense.
Okay. Now, we did have one question come in from the chat that I'd like to ask you. He said that he has heard that monatomic gold was found around the Great Pyramid. And I guess one question would be, what do you think that would be about? And then the second portion of it would be, what form of gold do you think that the Anunnaki may have used for their atmosphere?
Well, that's a very good question, and I asked myself that question, and I also asked Zecharia Sitchin. I said, they were here for 200,000 years mining our gold. They didn't need all that gold to close the atmosphere on their planet. They could have done it in the first 100,000 years, the amount of gold they got. What did they do with the extra gold? And I proposed to him that they ingested it in the form of monatomic gold. And he said to me, Marshall, the record speaks for itself. He would not go outside of the translations that he found. There was no evidence that they were ingesting the extra gold in the form of monatomic, but I think there's evidence that's showing up that that's perhaps what went on.
I do too, yeah.
Could have had something to do with extending their life. They were very concerned that they'd been here on this planet in our environment and our gravitational field for so long, they were starting to age. And back home on Nibiru, they didn't age as rapidly as they were aging here on Earth. So they might have had a scheme of trying to slow that down by using monatomic gold. I don't know. These are all just speculations on my part, and I have no proof of it.
Well, you've had more experience, though, with the area, though, as well. So, maybe a speculation from your side of things can be taken a little bit more reliably than the average person's as well. So,
Thank you. I also asked him one day, it dawned on me, he said, all the history I've ever read, the victors write the story of the war and how it went, their side of the story. And I said, well, these guys wrote the cuneiform tablets, and the story that we've been given of the mutiny in the gold mines, and one of the reasons why they created primitive workers and created the Homo sapiens species, a brand new species on the planet Earth, was that their miners mutinied and they wouldn't be able to dig the gold. And I said, do you think, Zecharia, that that's a spin? Do you think they wrote that just to cover up? They wanted to do something, and they did it and needed an excuse for it. Marshall, the record speaks for itself. He would not, again, go beyond that. This is just my very curious mind asking questions outside the box. But, the stories, all the stories we have on the cuneiform tablets, I think, were based on information that they gave to the Sumerians to write down.
Well, one thing I would say is that I have to at least respect Sitchin as far as the attitude like that is concerned, not wanting to step outside into speculative type things and just
Absolutely.
going with what he understood as being the translations of the stories. Yeah. I definitely appreciate that.
He was the teacher, and he was putting me in my place.
I definitely appreciate
in a nice
that.
way.
Yeah, that's kind of a different take than what you normally hear as far as Zecharia Sitchin is concerned. Most people who are against him basically say, well, he just came up with all of this stuff and kind of pulled it out of the air or whatever, not using nice language.
No, he was a meticulous researcher, Ira. And he had the big advantage of being a biblical scholar. He could read original Hebrew and the translations of the cuneiform scripts. He was able to match up the stories in the Bible, exact events and times and places, and verify the stories of the walls of Jericho, etc. All those stories, the Tower of Babylon. He had evidence that supported it from the cuneiform tablets. Many of the stories in our Bible originated, I believe, in the scripts of the cuneiform tablets.
It's very interesting. I've always thought the same thing, too. I mean, you can read the Bible and because, I used to be a Christian. I'm not anymore, but, I'm still very much in touch with my biblical background. And one of the things that I've always understood is that the stories in the Bible, they come from the past. You read the story of Noah, but it is the duplicate, basically, or the retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a much older story.
We wrote the second book. My wife and I, one of the things that Sitchin and I had going together in our conversations was we said we had to make a movie. And what would the story be of the first movie? And we both agreed it would be the Epic of Gilgamesh. And he said, okay, you write yours and I'll write mine. And by the way, they published his book. It was a form of a novel after he died. It's called The King Who Refused to Die. And we wrote with a script form, screenplay format, the second book called Gilgamesh 10, where I took Sitchin's translations and as many outside information as I could find about the storyline of Gilgamesh. And I said to my wife, I said, now put yourself back in Europe 4,600 years ago, and the Anunnaki are living side by side with humans, and this out-of-place king, this giant, is roaming around having all kinds of problems, and put dialogue to this storyline. And she was able to do that in the most brilliant fashion. And I think the book that we have is a great read of what life was like at a time that needs to be acknowledged, 4,600 years ago, when humans were living as serfs to the Anunnaki.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that so much of our history has really been lost over time. It seems like we as human beings, we have sort of risen up as a civilization and then fallen back down into almost the Stone Age over and over and over again.
Right.
And that causes such a traumatic type of genetic trauma that goes on that we just keep having to restart. Do you think that there is maybe something within us that was like maybe programmed by the Anunnaki to keep going through something like that,
well,
so that we don't get up there?
That's a very interesting idea, and it's something that Sitchin told me. He said, Marshall, without outside interference, we'd still be Stone Age people. Civilization does not occur through evolution. It comes from technology transfer from an advanced civilization. And that's exactly what the Sumerians said they had. They're the first recorded, quote, unquote, civilization with the first 100 necessities: the wheel, writing, philosophy, music, art, astrology, astronomy, all the sciences that they produced were given to them. They said, absolutely, everything we have was given to us by the Anunnaki. So if you think about it, we would still be Stone Age people if we hadn't been given this technology transfer. And the evidence is in that story, the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Very, very interesting. Now we have one other question, and then we'll go ahead and take our break here. We'll take about maybe a 6 or 7 minute break, give you a chance to rest your voice a little bit. But okay. One question that came in from the chat room is, do you know if Zecharia Sitchin was a Freemason?
No, I do not. And there's a lot of speculation on that, and there are people who are out to be naysayers. They create these fantasy stories. I don't know for sure, but I would absolutely say no to that answer.
Okay. Sounds great. We'll go ahead and take a break here real quick, and when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion with Marshall Klarfeld, and this has really been fascinating to me. I am really enjoying this so far.
All right. Ira, do you want to call me back, or should I hang on
Nope,
the line?
nope. Just go ahead and hang on the line. We'll go ahead and just mute your side, so they won't hear you. So,
okay.
Stick around with us, folks. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Mind, while we were on that break there, I wonder if you know, or if you maybe have any kind of thoughts on if they perhaps maybe genetically modified themselves along with us. The reason why I ask that is because if you think maybe how their world is, it's a lot more distant from the sun. There's a darker, colder, that kind of thing. So they may not have had bodies that would be used to our atmosphere and our environment. And so maybe they had to modify themselves a little bit, or actually created new beings that came here in their stead and were maybe taking commands from like the actual Anunnaki, anything along those lines. Have you ever thought of anything like that? Or?
Yes, I have. And in my opinion, they did modify their DNA to eliminate disease. It's my theory that we don't die of old age, we die of disease. And if you live as fantastically long lives as they appear to have done, you must have, A, eliminated disease. B, they were much taller and stronger physically than our species. Our species is, according to the translations, a bicameral species. In other words, they took a creature that existed here on this planet called Homo erectus, which had been evolving for about 1,800,000 years. Its most advanced tool making were throwing wooden spears and banging stones together, so they didn't get very advanced. They were Stone Age creatures, but they couldn't speak, and they didn't have any vocal equipment, so they were useless to the Anunnaki as a primitive worker. And what the stories reveal from the translations was that the Anunnaki, Enki, and his sister Nima did a bunch of experiments, and what they were doing, they were taking the female egg of Homo erectus and scooping out the nucleus and putting their DNA in it, and then planting that egg into an Anunnaki birth mother. And finally it worked, and they produced the first Homo sapien called Adamu, or Adam in the Bible. So at that point, they also created a female called Eve, or Tiamat, and they were sterile. It's like when you cross a horse with a donkey, you get a mule. And that's a crossbreeding and creating a bicameral species called a mule. But the mules are sterile. So they kept producing using the system that I described to you, but they got tired of doing that, so they figured there must be a way of allowing us to procreate on our own, and they did a four-way operation according to the translations, whereas they took the marrow from Adam's rib and somehow used it to fertilize Eve so that she could reproduce, and from then on it was us doing it on our own. And that species, by the way, Ira, was Homo sapiens. And you and I are called Homo sapiens sapiens because we were an upgrade from that first primitive worker. And the way that occurred was that thousands of years later, as reported in the Bible under Genesis 6:4, the Nephilim were upon the earth in those days. They were the sons of gods, and they coveted the daughters of man, had intercourse with them, and produced the giants of old. So here you had direct insemination from an Anunnaki, pure blood Anunnaki, into a female human, and you produced a new species called Homo sapiens sapien. And that's what you and I are. And that's the story as best I can give it to you folks from the cuneiform tablets.
Well, you know,
it appears in the Bible in other format, you know.
Right. If you look into like what's been found as far as our genetic structure is concerned, you can see that there is a very distinct twist or fuse that's in some of our chromosome material.
Oh, sure. Well, they described, it was interesting, there's a paragraph that describes Adamu as having red blood skin, color of the Abzu, dark. In other words, he was a dark-skinned human. And he also had a foreskin, and he said that would distinguish them from us. So apparently the Anunnaki didn't have foreskins. And I wonder, in my outside-the-box thinking, where circumcision came in to play is trying to emulate the Anunnaki.
That's what I was about ready to ask. Yeah, that's very interesting. You know, I wonder, I don't know if you've done any kind of looking as far as this topic is concerned, but maybe you have. And I know that recently there has been studies released showing that some people have actually been have been born having 3 DNA strands instead of the dual helix. It's a trihelix. And I wonder if there's any relation to what has happened in the past as far as our starting is concerned.
As my research goes, Ira, we all have 2 strands. We have regular DNA, and then we have what's called mitochondrial DNA.
Right, the RNA.
Mitochondrial DNA doesn't have any ends to it. In other words, most of our DNA is looped. But the third, having 3 strands, I haven't heard that.
Yeah,
come across that in my research.
I wasn't sure if you had or not. There was a big study that came out. I believe it was in the journal Nature, if I remember correctly. But anyways, they were revealing information that they had been seeing now a few births where the child has actually had 3 DNA strands happening. So I didn't know maybe if you had done any research on that or not. But
no, have you had any reports of children being born with 6 fingers?
There are many reports of that. Yeah, definitely.
Well, in his book, The King Who Refused to Die, Sitchin reports that they had 6 fingers. I don't know about that. We never talked about that. So I have no reference on that. But I was curious if you had discovered some, and apparently you have.
Yes, most definitely. It's
Now, it's interesting also, Ira, that people ask me, what did they look like? Did they look like us? I said, no, we look like them.
That's a good way to twist it, yeah.
I mean, we are their progeny. And all of us share the same DNA. We're truly brothers and sisters under the skin, and we've got to realize that we are a species that shares this magnificent DNA, and we should quit killing each other in the name of your God's better than my God. That's got to stop.
It really does. In fact, the Sumerians, when they wrote in the cuneiform tablets, they didn't really even refer to the Anunnaki as gods either, did they?
No, they were lords. Yeah, right.
So, and that's been kind of misconstrued, and that's, again, one of the misconceptions that's around, is that these...
Well, here's an interesting thing I discovered, or I'll share it with you and your audience. For 6,000 years, starting with the Sumerians, there was a pantheon of gods, which were headed up by a commander and his half-brother. In other words, the first was Enlil, who was the commander, the pure blood, and Enki, who was the firstborn but not of pure blood. And they appear all through 6,000 years of history down to the Romans, where you have Jupiter is the commander and his brother Neptune is the water god. And you go back one civilization to the Greeks, and it's Zeus is the commander and his brother Poseidon is the water god. So they really morphed from the Sumerian pantheon of these 12 Anunnaki leaders through 6,000 years of worship. They became gods from being lords in the beginning. That's kind of fascinating.
It is, definitely.
And I often wondered, the depiction on the cylinder seals of these guys, they had helmets. They all wore these kind of spacey helmets. And they had signatures, symbols on their horns, sets of horns. Like Ishtar had one set of horns, and her brother Shamash, the sun god, had 2 sets of horns, and Enki had 4, and Enlil had 5, which was kind of like a military signature.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. If you look at the way that the military patches work these days, you have the different ranks symbolizing.
Right. And the interesting thing is that they had a grand council. The Anunnaki's grand council consisted of 12 individuals. 6 of them were men, and the other 6 were women, mostly their wives. And they had a number ranking, and the ranking was also based on number 60. Anu, the king, was 60, and Enlil was 50. And everybody wanted to move up, and particularly the problem, which is a fascinating story in itself, is that it goes that Enki's firstborn son, Marduk, really felt that his father should inherit the throne because he was firstborn, and that therefore his inheritance, Marduk's inheritance, would be that eventually he would become Lord of the Earth. And it did come to pass after many wars that Marduk in Babylon in the year 2024 BC became Lord of the Earth through a series of circumstances, one of them which was an atomic war. And the Bible records that these war events at Sodom and Gomorrah. If you read the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and compare it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it's almost identical.
And that also alludes to the things that are in the Mahabharata as well,
yes, exactly.
With the displays of what seems to be an atomic attack during that time period as well.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you know?
Best they could describe it with their technology. They were technically insecure, and they couldn't really describe it in terms that it actually happened. So they made up these stories.
Right, like we were discussing earlier, where they didn't have the scientific terminology to use, so they just came up with what they could.
Is an excellent way to put it. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, no problem at all. So, okay, then in regards to like the Anunnaki themselves, you could say then that they basically were probably the first species in the solar system to advance to a sentient type of being. Then.
Yeah, you could say that.
So they themselves are actually kind of the lords of the solar system, I guess.
Well, Sitchin always said, if they came to Earth, and one of the stories, I think it was in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the message from their creator of all was that the destiny of the Anunnaki was to come to Earth to create humanity, and humanity's destiny was to inherit the planet and take care of it. And as you know, we're not doing a very good job. But the thing that puzzled Sitchin and puzzles me is who created the Anunnaki?
That's the big question. That's kind of what I was wondering, is if there was another race somewhere that came in and created the Anunnaki, and maybe if the ways that they did
we don't have any written record of that.
Right, exactly.
As they dig around in the translations, they talk about what life was like on Nibiru, but they never get to the point of talking about a visitation that they had that created them.
Do you know, was anybody taken to Nibiru from here? Like, were any humans taken to Nibiru from here?
Yes. There's a story that Enki created two offspring from two beautiful human females. One was Adapa, and the other was Tiamat, a male and female. And he taught Adapa everything he could, and I was amazed at how quick he learned how to do most of the things that the other humans couldn't do. So he took him to Anu to show him what was possible with the new species. And that story, of course, is referred to in the Bible, Ezekiel, and there's several references of chariots in the sky that picked up a human and took him away.
One question that came in from the chat, sorry for my grammar there, one question that came in from the chat is, do you know or do you have any idea, like the point of reference where a lot of people refer to the Anunnaki as being the reptilians that have been visiting the Earth? Do you think of that, or?
No, I think those depictions in the sculptures and sometimes in the cylinder seals were cartoons. Cartoon characters. They were having some fun. I have no evidence of reptilians in the database. A huge Sumerian database, over 300,000 cuneiform tablets and thousands of cylinder seals, but I don't believe they had the ability. And you take the Epic of Gilgamesh, they were able to clone the face of the king onto a creature, Enkidu, and then to program him mentally to do what they wanted him to do. So if they had the ability to change facial features to match up with another human or another one of their species, like there's a cylinder seal that shows Enkidu and King Gilgamesh, and they have the same face. So somehow they were able to do that. They probably had the ability to do many things, but as far as shape-shifting and reptilians, I have no evidence of that at all, Ira.
No problem at all. Okay, so in relation then to what you were just saying, something popped into my head. Do you think, and we can kind of maybe infer from the way that things go, the cycle of destruction of knowledge, basically, that happens throughout history, we see that there is almost, when you look at, for example, the Egyptian mythology and how the Egyptians, I guess, kind of co-opted things from the past, what they called like
they came about 300 years after the Sumerians.
Right, and so like when they had their pharaohs, for instance, a lot of the pharaohs, quote unquote, ascended to be gods and that sort of thing. Do you think that maybe this was like a a perversion, basically, of the way that the Anunnaki interacted with humanity before?
That's possible, but it's also possible that some of the pharaohs were actually Anunnaki. Because if you look at the Sumerians' kings list, which gives the timeline to when they came here, the 400,000-year timeline comes from the Sumerian kings list. And those kings were those were Anunnaki kings. And you look at the skull shape of some of the pharaohs and the helmets that they wore to cover up maybe a pointed skull, it's very possible that they were either direct offspring, like Gilgamesh was, or that they were indeed put in place by, Thoth was the leader for 1,500 years over Egypt. He was the son of Enki. His original name was Ningasada, who designed the Great Pyramid. And then he was replaced by his brother, Marduk, his older brother. And Marduk then became the ruler of Egypt, and Thoth went off to the New World to start new civilizations under the guise of Quetzalcoatl and various gods over there, the Olmecs and the Viracocha. You read those histories. In fact, in my books, it would be fun for your audience to pick up some of those from my website, because the pictures really tell the story. I'm a reporter, and I have words in the books, but mostly they're beautiful color pictures which explain this whole story, and it shows the physical evidence that proves that the story is true, in my opinion. But you got to get it out of the books.
Right, exactly. So one question that came in from the chat a little earlier as well is, do you know if they had much interaction with North America, and if so, maybe what type of interaction?
Oh, yeah. There's evidence, like at Chaco Canyon. They built Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito. I think they built the Snake Mounds in Ohio. And, if you look at the Hopi tribe and most of the American Indian tribes, they all have depictions of their creators coming from the sky. They were sky gods. So definitely there was interaction all over the place. And the evidence that they left that I point out in my books are a place in Colorado and in New Mexico, Chaco Canyon. And, of course, you go down a little further into Central America, you've got all those pyramids. And there may be some pyramids buried in our northern environs that we haven't uncovered yet.
Yeah, I absolutely think there is. I come from a Native American background myself, so I definitely am in agreement with that portion of things. Definitely, especially when it comes to the snake mounds. I mean, there are things that are here in North America that are just amazing, and that people probably have never even heard of or realize are here. Some of them are very fascinating. You look into some of the Clovis architecture and information. Yeah. It's fascinating to me.
Absolutely. And I think that, one of the interesting things about civilization that we talked about earlier was that the Sumerians were given everything, including the wheel. But in the Americas, the wheel was never given. And there's no evidence that Stone Age culture develops a wheel on its own. Because we have, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Olmecs, never had a wheel because it wasn't given to them. And my theory on that, my opinion, Ira, is it's easier to control people if they don't have the wheel.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Especially when it comes to any kind of technology, right. It's always the idea. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was Arthur C. Clarke who said that any technology sufficiently advanced would appear as magic to anybody that didn't have it. So it's that way. I really do think so, that it's much easier to control people when you control the technology and they're left basically with the dregs, sort of like we always have been.
Yeah.
Just the way I look at things, I guess.
I think that's very perceptive on your part, Ira.
One question then as well would be, in the different writings, different tablets that have been left behind, is there any talk of other races that have come here and interacted as well? Or is it just strictly in regards to the Anunnaki?
All I've found is the Anunnaki. Now, there are people who are reporting through other methods like channeling and past life regressions that there are other species out there, and I don't doubt that. You know, we're not alone in our particular species, and the Anunnaki are connected, but that's not to say that there aren't other. And the universe is huge, and the Milky Way is huge, and the possibilities, the law of probability tells us that there's got to be other life forms out there that we haven't contacted them yet.
What is your thoughts? There's been a lot of evidence that has come out as far as Mars is concerned. What are your thoughts as far as Mars is concerned? Do you think that the Anunnaki had anything there?
The report from the cuneiform tablets is that it was a way station for the Anunnaki. In other words, they were able to refuel there. Mars had water and an atmosphere for a long time. And they had a base up there, and they used it. They shipped the gold from Earth to Mars and then shipped it from there to Nibiru. So they called it a way station, and they had a colony up there. In fact, Marduk ended up there for a while, being in charge. He wanted to be in charge of something, so they made him in charge of Mars. Get rid of him. They shipped him out of town, you know.
Go to this little backwater.
Yeah, right.
What do you think happened as far as Mars is concerned? You know, like why we see so much of the destruction there?
The story that I have on that is that the last time Nibiru passed between Jupiter and Mars, and you know, was maybe the zero, the Bethlehem, the star of Bethlehem. That was 2,000 years ago. There were huge problems on Mars. It swept away the gravitational field, pulled all the atmosphere off Mars, and they lost their water and no longer became an operational base. They reported that in their writings, that they couldn't use it anymore because it didn't have any atmosphere and didn't have any more water. So that I know that there were reports that what Mars is today was the result of one of the passes of Nibiru through the inner planets. It has huge gravitational forces, and it's stripped, apparently, according to what their writings are, it stripped it of its atmosphere and its water, and also the ability to habit. You know, they closed down their colony up there, and Marduk came back to Earth, and gave us problems.
Do you know if there was any others in the solar system, like any other outposts or waypoints or anything like that?
No, there was no evidence. I only base what I'm telling you on what is written and what was translated, so that my research has not revealed any other evidence, physical evidence. There is some physical evidence on Mars, by the way. We will find that when we go there. They buried one of the kings up there. One of their leaders is buried up there. And there may be a pyramid, and there may be a face, like a sphinx. They use the sphinx to commemorate Ningasada for his creation of the pyramids at Giza. That was a tribute to him, Enki's son. There's many stories. I mean, it's fascinating. People really have to do their own research. I can't, tell everything, because it's
there's way too much, right? Exactly. It's only possible for one person to know.
There's thousands and thousands of stories.
Right. Exactly.
Go on forever.
And as far as the tablets are concerned, do you know, like, we know for a fact that there's been a lot of knowledge that's been lost over the years, like the burning of Alexandria, for instance, and that was not a singular event. There's been many different libraries over the years that have been destroyed. A lot of different people have come into areas and literally stolen away the books and all of that kind of stuff. Knowledge has been lost. Do you know if there is any evidence or any kind of things that you've run across to show that there are also still a lot of these tablets or steles that have not been found, basically, because they've been stolen away?
I would, in my opinion, say there's got to be, you got to just dig down deeper. It's kind of like Göbekli Tepe. They've only cut the surface of that. They've uncovered 3 circular stone structures, but their ground-penetrating radar shows them there's 40 more of those underneath there in the sand. And, the Sphinx was almost buried up to its neck until they started digging around and uncovered it. Yeah, no, I agree. We're going to find tunnels. We're going to find cities under the earth, under the pyramids, maybe. I think the Egyptians are holding out on us. They've got a lot of information they haven't shared because they're afraid to destroy the myth that they did all that stuff.
That's my thought, too. I know that just recently Graham Hancock had a pretty large altercation when it came to dealing with Zahi Hawass over there in Egypt, and that was a pretty funny video. If you guys haven't seen that yet, you guys should go to YouTube and look that one up.
And for a long time, I've National Geographic got into bed with that guy just so that they could send their film crews over there, and he had the open door to letting them photograph stuff, but he controlled the information. And I think for a while, when the Egyptian government was overthrown, they threw him in jail, if I'm not mistaken, because he was, he wasn't a straight shooter. And I love the fact that Graham caught him on it.
It was hilarious. One of the best videos I've ever seen.
Yeah. Wow. No, to answer your question further, I'm positive that we're going to discover many, many more things that will help us enlarge our knowledge of the database and also advance our technology, because we're at the edge of our space age right now. We're infants. We've actually gone to the moon and landed there. We've sent probes to Mars and to the outer planets, and even some of them have gone outside of our solar system into the universe, into the Milky Way anyway, so that we are growing as a space-age civilization, but we are also threatened by that technology. We've created rockets to get up there, but those rockets can be tipped with atomic and hydrogen warheads and EMP bombs, and we can destroy ourselves. We are at the tipping point of our civilization could go bye-bye very quickly if we don't control things.
Oh, absolutely. There are enough nuclear weapons on the planet right now to destroy this planet 17 times over. So, and I mean literally crack the planet into little itty-bitty pieces. So
I have a very positive take, which I'll share with you and your audience, and I've done this in most of my lectures, that the Anunnaki saved us once. In other words, after the flood, you can imagine Earth covered with 11 miles of mud. And even if those people on the ark with their animals did land safely on Mount Ararat, what would they eat? How would they live? There was absolutely nothing. No trees, no food, no animals. And at that point in the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it is reported that the Anunnaki were directed by their creator of all to save humanity, and they brought down from the mothership trees and animals and wheat and things that could grow that helped us survive that calamity. So if we're facing into another huge calamity, I've heard reports of flying saucers that have flown over our silos and completely deactivated them. They have the technology and they have the interest in us. We're kind of their experiment or their progeny, and if they see us, they're observing us now. At the point of losing it, they could interfere and help us, save ourselves from ourselves.
So you do think that they have an interest in us still?
Oh, sure. And people ask me, well, do you have to wait till Nibiru comes back in 1,600 years? I said, no. It's my opinion that when they left our civilization, they retreated to their mothership and took off and are maybe hanging out around Mercury, which is nearby, and can come back anytime they want. That's just my opinion.
Do you think that maybe they are responsible for some of the sites that we've seen from, like, for instance, SOHO, the Solar Observatory, where we see almost what looks like ships sort of drawing power from the sun and that sort of thing?
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely convinced that they are out there and that they're observing us and that they send us messages through crop circles. I'm a firm believer that a lot of those crop circles were created by them, the Anunnaki. And it's a crapshoot whether we make it or not. But I would give hope to your audience that we have people watching over us, hopefully going to prevent us from destroying ourselves.
That is definitely something that I hope for as well.
Well, they, the history on their own planet, they did it. They know, they've gone through this before. They had atomic wars on Nibiru, the reports of them. And that's how they blew the hole in their ozone leak, blew the hole in their atmosphere as a result of their atomic wars. So they've had the history themselves. They know the devastation that they can create. They've used them here in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they caused the destruction of the Sumerian civilization. The story was that the radiation fallout from the Sodom and Gomorrah bombs drifted east over Sumer and completely destroyed that civilization, which was their pride and joy. And that was a great calamity to them. They didn't think that. I mean, they should have thought they're smart enough, but it happened, and they were very sorry that their golden city on the hill was wiped out.
So to you, I guess one question that I would have then is, when you read the stories, when you read like why we were created by them and all of that things, all of the things that go with it. Mm-hmm. Most people, when they read this kind of a story, they think, well, okay, so we were created as a slave race. Obviously, we were treated as slaves, so they don't give two cruds about us, basically. But if you were to...
That's not true.
Right, okay, so I was just going to ask you as far as that goes.
That. The evidence is that after a while, they started giving us technology. Like the Sumerian civilization is the example of them wanting us to advance. They wouldn't have transmitted all of those firsts that made the Sumerians a civilized people if they hadn't an interest in us advancing as civilized people. Its evidence is there.
And to me, that's good. I mean, I find that alone to be really interesting, as far as that that type of thinking is concerned.
And then the phasing off, that occurred later on was that let them go for themselves, see if they can make it.
and so far, I think we've done okay for ourselves for the most part, but we still have a whole lot of learning to do, I think.
You got that right.
Well, listen, we're going to go ahead and take another break. We're going to take the last break here real quick. And when we come back, we're definitely going to continue this conversation. I'm loving this so far tonight, Marshall, and I'm definitely appreciative of you being here. So,
okay, I'll be here.
Stick around with us, guys. We'll be back in just a few minutes. I know how it is. My name is, with being Ira, I get it pronounced so many different ways when people see it. So it never bothers me when people do. We had a question come in from the chat, and if you guys want to, please go to lnmradionetwork.com, join the chat room, and get involved in the conversation. This has been just a wonderful night. One of the people asked, who exactly are the Elohim?
Okay, that's a very good question, and in the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh was the name that they gave to their God. The Hebrew tribe thought that Yahweh was his name, and that the Elohim were those that followed. And it's very interesting in the development of religions here on planet Earth. If you really step back and take a look at what the Anunnaki did, one of the best ways to control people in the beginning was kingship, and of course they brought kingship down for themselves the first 200,000 years before the humans appeared, and they were Anunnaki kings. Well, those kingship was brought down for humans, and that was a way of controlling large masses. And then the second thing they did, Ira, was to bring down religion. And with religion, of course, you also maintain quite a degree of control. And, of course, religions tend to morph and spread. And then you had this edict in the Hebrew first book, or the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, called the Torah, where the 10 Commandments appear. Thou shalt have no other God but me. I mean, here's one deity saying that there's just got to be one God. There can't be all these other gods. And as we know from the 6,000 years that I reported to you, the civilized world in Mesopotamia and Turkey and further out into Asia and Asia Minor had the same deities that were the pantheon from the Sumerian civilization. So I think that the words have to be understood in the context of what was going on. And I believe in it, and I think Sitchin and I also agreed that perhaps Yahweh, the Hebrew God, was Enlil. There's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that he was Yahweh. And then you can go further from that if you want.
Well, I know one thing that I'm big on when it comes to any kind of work, when it relates to the past, is that context is the key to everything. You have to know exactly what was being said, who it was being said to, the time and place that it was being said. All of these different things can make a vast difference on the way that things are translated.
I go along with the theory that the first spoken language on planet Earth was Sumerian, that was the language of the Anunnaki. And if they were birthing Adam and Eve and all the original Homo sapiens, that they spoke to them as they raised them up in their native language, which was Sumerian, and everybody was speaking, Sumerian. And that's a very difficult language. In fact, the cuneiform tablets were originally written in that language, and Zecharia told me that each character meant 5 different things, so the translation was a nightmare. If you had, such a complex language that had so many meanings to each phrase that you gave it, that it's a difficult language. It's no longer spoken. Yet Carl Sagan, when he sent out the golden record on Voyager 1 and 2, saying hello, hi, here we are for friendly, the first language he put on there was Sumerian.
Do you think that, and that kind of brings up a question that I was going to ask you earlier, is do you think that there are those that are sitting in power now that still have a connection to the Anunnaki, and maybe if they sent that out as the primary message, maybe they understood that this was actually how things were meant to be?
That certainly is a possibility, Ira. I have no physical proof. I read reports, I see YouTubes, and I see movies of people talking about the secret society that the presidents, Truman and so forth, made deals with, but I have no evidence of that. I mean, they're producing stuff that I can't verify, and it's very possible. But to me, unless they were able to physically change their shape, they're 9 feet tall. They'd stand out like a sore thumb. If they were around here. So
well, I don't know. Sometimes you look at the average basketball player these days, and they're getting up there.
They're getting there. They're getting there,
Well, one thing that I had come in from the chat as well, as far as the question goes, is you were saying that they basically, when they first created us, they made it so that we could not procreate. Maybe what?
No, they didn't. No, that happens naturally.
Okay.
Like I told you the story of the horse and the donkey.
Right, with the mule,
when
right.
You crossbreed 2 species, you get an infertile, sterile species.
Okay, gotcha. So then the next question would be, what about the way that we look at anthropological history, for instance? We see that human beings have existed all around, everywhere basically, and we all take, different shapes and sizes and colors and all that kind of stuff. I know that is basically a kind of a product of adaptation, so I'm probably answering my own question with some of this, but what was the reasoning for all of these different things to be put into us as far as the Anunnaki are concerned?
Well, I don't think they did it on purpose. I think it was a natural result of them trying to create a primitive worker. They took the material that was at hand. In other words, the material that they had to work with was a species called Homo erectus, which was a creature, third the brain size and no vocal cords. So when they successfully bred Adam from the female egg of the Homo erectus and their DNA, and they planted it in one of their birth mothers. We kind of do things like that today for women that are infertile. It's nothing new. It's a process that can be done scientifically. So the result that you get is the combination of the original host DNA, which was Homo erectus, and the new DNA, which was Anunnaki, and the bicameral species that you end up with is Homo sapiens.
So it was definitely not an intentional thing, like evil on their part, basically causing us to not be able to procreate.
I don't believe that.
Okay.
I mean, that's possible, Ira, but that's beyond any proof I have.
Right. That's not what the evidence suggests.
That they tinkered with that to produce what we are. We are what we are, and when we became Homo sapiens sapiens, there was, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. Our species is about 200,000 years old, so we're very young. If you look back in the history of the planet, the guys that had the best run were the dinosaurs. They were here for 69 million years. We're nowhere near that. We're infants as a species.
Exactly.
But we've risen to the top of the food chain. We're in control. And we got to see what we do with it.
In the stories that were being told, one other question that came in is in the stories that were told as far as the nuclear weapons being used in the war that occurred, what was the reasoning for the war, basically? Why did that war begin? Especially
the rivalry. There were two clans. There was the Enki clan and the Enlil clan. Of course, Enki was here first, and he was... Excuse me. Need some more tea. He was the firstborn son of the king, but his mother was not the queen. His mother was a concubine. So according to their rules, he didn't have direct access to the throne. Whereas his younger brother, Enlil, was born from the queen and the king and contained the pure bloodline. Therefore, his succession was to be that of Anu eventually. And his offspring had a great line to the power authority. But the conflict came about with Marduk. Marduk was the firstborn son of Enki, and he looked at the playing field. He said, "It's not level. You're the firstborn. You should be the next king." And that's when the trouble started. And of course, they had kids, and Enki had a lot of kids, and they had kids, and they developed into two factions that were not really friendly to each other. They had disputes, and they got into wars. They had a couple of pyramid wars. And finally, when they got into the 4,000 years ago, the atomic war, it was the children that caused it. It wasn't Enki and Enlil, but it was their offspring that decided that they were going to go at it. And there were 7 atomic weapons that had been brought to Earth on the first mission, and they were secretly held in some far-off cave, which nobody knew about. But somehow the word got out, and those kids got a hold of those weapons, and they used them, much to the demise of Enki and Enlil. They didn't really want that to happen. But it did, and you did what you did, and I did what I did, and look at the mess we made here. But the prophecy, interesting, was that the evil wind, Ira, swept from the Sinai Desert eastward and destroyed the Sumerian civilization, but it bypassed Babylon. And Babylon was where Marduk was hanging out. So I said, okay, it must be fate that is deciding this, so it's time to give him his shot. So they made him Lord of the Earth. Around that time, he took over. They gave him his full reign. That's when the real trouble started. We have to live today with the results of that.
One thing that I notice in that story, I can't help but notice the similarity actually between that story and the way that it played out, and the story of how actually the Hebrew religion and the Islamic religion started out.
Sure, it was Abraham. Abraham had 2 sons. His firstborn son was by his wife's handmaiden, who was an Arab, and his name was Ishmael. He was the firstborn son, but he wasn't born from the wife Sarah. And later on, Lord God gave her fertility, and they produced Isaac, which was firstborn from Abraham and Sarah, who, by the way, Sarah was his sister. A lot of people don't know that.
Yes, true.
Anyway, that's the beginning of the trouble. And the story reflects, absolutely, you're right on the money, the story of Enki and Enlil and Anu and the sister. There was a sister, the three of them.
I wonder how much of, like, if you go into like the biblical story and that sort of thing, if that was like based in reality, or if that was like maybe a retelling of the Enki and Enlil story.
Ira. It is very possible that the echoes in the Bible of the stories of Cain and Abel and all of the wars that were fought and the succession and the dominance of one religion over another could have been an echo of the history of the Anunnaki. Very possible.
It's either that, or it's actually the cycle of history repeating itself.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
either way, though, there is definitely something that's there.
Very good. You're very observing. Most people don't pick up on that.
So we have another question that came in from the chat. This question is, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this or not, if there's anything in the stories relating to this or not, but the question is, do you know, was Saturn actually originally our sun, and now we have this other one as being our sun?
No, there's no evidence of that. We have the story of the 7 tablets. The Numa Elish was the first record of the creation of our solar system, translated that on the 4th day was the greater light of the day and the lesser light of the night. In other words, in the evolution of our solar system, the sun had to ignite in order for us to be a pure-blood solar system. And that didn't happen until late in the process. And one of the early questions that got to me at Caltech was, how'd those guys 5,000 years ago know how a solar systems work? Because out of 6 days of creation, the 4th day is certainly late. And we only learned that 100 years ago. How'd those guys get so smart?
Exactly. That's one thing that I've always wondered when it comes to like these ancient stories, is how much of truth you find in them overall. You know, when you again bypass the mythology that's associated with it, and you get down into the bare facts.
To the physical facts,
right?
And what I do in my books for people to observe for themselves, look at the pictures. It's like a Life magazine format. And you can see the physical evidence of the stone monuments, Stonehenge, the pyramids, the temples and pyramids in Central America. And there's just hundreds and hundreds of stone things put together without mortar. Now, the technique is this, architectural technique is the same. Even Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat is a temple built in a marshy place that rains 6 months out of the year, and you wonder how they pulled off that construction. But those stones are all put together without masonry, and somebody once figured out there were more stones in Angkor Wat than there are in the Great Pyramid of Egypt. You got to ask yourself, Ira, who did this? I mean, this is evidence of some advanced technology being here before us, and that's my proof that the Anunnaki were here.
At the very least, it shows that there was something that happened in our past that we don't understand, and again has been lost to kind of the annals of history. And it's unfortunate that we don't have a connection with our history enough to be able to trace the line back all the way.
Well, my mission, Ira, with what I'm trying to do with you tonight and with many people who I talk to, is to try to awaken people to the past. Get to know the history of the past. Get the information. Do your own research. Find out what was going on before the Bible. You know, the Bible is not the beginning of our history. Our history goes thousands and thousands of years before the Bible. And if people would take the time to inform themselves, we'd be a better planet.
Unfortunately, a lot of people don't look past, like, right in front of their nose, really. And that's something that we on these shows here on this network, we try really hard to do the same thing, awaken people up to the facts.
Well,
awaken people
good
up
for
to
you, and thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate being able to chat with you this evening, Ira, because the more people that are exposed to these bits of information that I've given you, the better off we're going to be.
Exactly. And even if people don't necessarily believe it or understand it right away, it's still flipping around in the back of their mind, right? It's still floating around in there somewhere, and it'll at least open up a train of thought.
I'm a firm believer that we should teach our children in school 3 things. Let them choose between evolution, intelligent design, and genetic engineering. Make available at the younger school ages this information.
And what I think a lot of people don't really understand, too, is that all 3 of them can combine together. There's no reason why they couldn't.
They all combine together, and but the genetic engineering part of it's been left out. People don't know about it. That's what my mission is, to get that word out.
Well, I'm definitely appreciative of it, because I think that the more people like you that are coming forward to speak about this kind of information, the better off we all are, because we do need to have some kind of connection to where we've come from to avoid even what happened in the past happening again. That's
you don't
my
learn
personal...
from history, you're destined to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Precisely. And unfortunately, we see that happening over and over again. Mm-hmm. One other question that came in from the chat is in regards to the moon. And I guess it's kind of a 2-part question. The first part of the question would be, what exactly is the moon, and how does it relate as far as the Anunnaki is concerned?
Okay. Well, the story that comes from the Tablets of Creation, the story of Enuma Elish, which I published in my first book, Adam the Missing Link, it was attached. It was a satellite of Tiamat, the 4th planet, before it got whacked. And when it became the 3rd planet, the moon came with it. So, according to my best research, it was already a satellite of a planet that carried forward. It was called Kingu. They described the moon as Kingu. And Kingu was Tiamat's master because it controlled the tides. It was a very watery planet. And after the collision, its orbit retained itself on the new planet called Earth, which became the 3rd planet. But since Earth, since Earth is smaller than Tiamat, the gravitational pull that holds the moon in orbit around us is lessened, and they have evidence that the moon is leaving us slowly. That's all I can contribute to that.
Okay. I know that there are, many stories throughout history that tell of a time before the moon was there and then a time when the moon came. We see in examinations that NASA has done that the stones and the dust on the moon are actually older than the Earth, and so on and so forth. So we know there's something strange that's going on with the moon, but it's just a matter of exactly what.
Well, the recorded stories that we have is that it was attached as a satellite of Tiamat and stayed with Tiamat and became Earth's moon.
Right, and again, like you were saying earlier, Tiamat and Earth are one and the same. It's just this, the Earth basically is the remnants of Tiamat.
Yeah.
Along with the asteroid belt.
Okay. Listen, I'm running out of my steam and my voice here, so I'd appreciate if we could wind this up.
Yes, most definitely. I'm more than willing to do so. Basically, go ahead and give out your information as far as where people can find you, where they can find your books and all of that kind of stuff, and any information that you'd like to get out. It's
www.adamthemissinglink.com. That's www.adamthemissinglink.com. That's my website. There's 2 pages. First page has a video. Second page has all the books and information about them, and it's priced much better than Amazon, so I would suggest they go there before they go to Amazon.
Sounds great. Marshall, I really appreciate you being here tonight. I know that this has been rough on you because you've just been winding down your conference circuit and all of that kind of stuff that goes with it,
Right.
and you've been having difficulty with your voice. So I'm so appreciative of you coming on here, especially for so long, and answering all the questions that we had coming in.
Well, thank you, Ira. I think it's an informative interview that you were created here, and I hope that many people get a chance to see it and hear it and do their own research and find out for themselves where we came from.
Exactly. That's something that I advocate fully. Thank you so much, Marshall.
Thank you, Ira.
Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, folks, there you go. Marshall Clarefield.
Hello, Ira.
Hello, Marshall. How are you tonight?
Fine, fine. How are you tonight?
So far, so good. You are on Late Night in the Midlands. We are live, and I would love to welcome you here. It has been very... I've been looking forward to this conversation very much all week.
Well, hi, and it's good to be back. I think Michael interviewed me many years ago.
He mentioned that he had you on at least
Hello?
once before. Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. There was just a little dead space there.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think the Skype got a little bit delayed there. It kind of lagged for a moment. We should be good though now. So if you don't mind, go ahead and.
Are we on the air yet?
Yep, we are live. We are live and on the air.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind, let's start off by maybe telling a little bit of your backstory so that people can get an understanding of where you're coming from and what you're all about.
Okay, thank you. This all started back in '47 when I entered Caltech as a freshman in the fall of September of that year. In the summer of that, an incident occurred at Roswell, New Mexico called the UFO incident, which I think everybody's familiar with. So, of course, the buzzword on campus was that we wanted to know, were there aliens, what's a UFO? And we couldn't quit talking about it. Ira, it was like the only subject that really held forward. So anyway, I was blessed at Caltech to have two outstanding professors. One was Richard Feynman in physics, and the other was Linus Pauling in chemistry. During the course of my junior year, I really was compelled to ask them the following questions. I asked Richard Feynman if he believed in UFOs, and I asked Pauling if he believes in God. This is really where it started for me, and their answers stayed with me for over 65 years. I published it in my first book called Adam and the Missing Link, the answers to those questions. And after I graduated Caltech in 1951, I went into a business career for 30 and retired. And I went into around the trip world and became very interested in going back and doing something. So I had another career. But I was always curious with the answers I got from Pauling and Feynman. Are we alone? Is there a God? And then I was blessed with the third teacher. In 1999, I picked up a book called The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin, and that opened the door for me to understand the answers that I needed to pursue the course that I'm now pursuing, which is the history of the Anunnaki. I've written 4 books about that. The first one was Adam the Missing Link. The second one was Gilgamesh 10. The third one was the Anunnaki Were Here. And my current book, called The Mysteries of Alien Technology, sums up my luminous research into this very fascinating subject. I guess that's my background.
I've definitely read all of Sitchin's books myself over the years, and I find them to be fascinating. Even if I don't necessarily agree with everything that I read in them, I definitely find them to be fascinating, and I love the topic of it, and I love the ideas that are contained within it. So now you said that your book is Adam and the Missing Link. Your Skype kind of cut out just slightly on that. So it's Adam and the Missing Link.
Adam the Missing Link, which was the subject of where we came from. And I asked Zecharia, I know after reading The 12th Planet, I pursued the rest of his books, as you probably did. I said, your books are very scholarly, Zecharia. They're very intense, and most people I don't think are going to the answer that they need. So would you mind if I published your theory, the Sitchin theory, of that stuff you translated for us, in an 8.5 by 11 format, kind of like Life magazine with lots of pictures in it? He said, sure, Marshall, go ahead. And you say and use any of my material with permission by Zecharia Sitchin, and I give you permission. So my 10-year relationship with Zecharia started there. And we had a wonderful, he was my teacher, I was a student, and the answers that came to me were not necessarily the ones that he always came up with, but I was able to use him as a sounding board as I progressed forward.
I would definitely have loved to have been able to pick his brain, on a personal basis, one-to-one basis. That would have been amazing, a definitely amazing experience.
That was a joy. It was a joy to me.
I would agree. I would love to do that myself. Listen, actually, let me go ahead and hang up with you on Skype here real quick and call you right back and see if we can get a little bit of a better connection going. For some reason, it's
okay.
Cutting out just a little bit. Let's give it another shot. Skype does that sometimes, So let me go ahead and hang up with you here real quick, and I'll call you right back.
Thank you.
Folks, be patient with us. We're going to see if we can get a better connection going here with him. And I know it's a little bit of a difficulty, but, it's live radio. So sometimes Skype will do a little bit of a bad connection, and we have to just kind of reset and give it another try.
Hello, Ira.
Hello there, Marshall. Okay, let's see if that's any better. We can go on with the conversation from here.
Okay. No, that's you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, great. So, with Adam and the Missing Link, why don't we start there a little bit, I guess? And what was your process when you first started off with that, thinking, I'm going to write this book? What do I want to have in it? Kind of like your basis of study with it all, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Well, the thing that I found fascinating was the story that Zecharia Sitchin had translated from the cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals, and it was such a fascinating story. I was able to reproduce the pictures of the cylinder seals and the cuneiform tablets and explain how he unraveled the cosmology of the Sumerians. You see, the history in the cuneiform tablets is really the history of Sumerian civilization, which was the first civilization that appeared on planet Earth with writing. They wrote down their story on these cuneiform tablets, which were discovered in the sands of Iraq around 1820. And they started translating them, and they discovered that they were the history of mankind before the Bible. So my subtitle for Adam the Missing Link was The New Story of the Creation of Mankind, because it does reveal some facts that are fascinating that aren't in the Bible. Everybody thinks the Bible is the history of civilization, of us, Homo sapiens, but it isn't. There were thousands of years of history before the Bible that Zecharia was able to reveal to us by his translations. So in that first book, with the over 70 pictures, I was able to show how he developed, what he developed, what physical evidence is on this planet. I published 14 major stone monuments that prove that there was a technology here that was way beyond that of early man, Stone Age man, and that there must have been a civilization that colonized this planet over 400,000 years ago. And as the Sumerians said, they called themselves the Anunnaki. And that story is spelled out in the first book.
So a big question here would be, what in your thoughts and in your research have you been able to figure out as far as what exactly are the Anunnaki, and do they have anything to do with what is like commonly thought? You know, because so many people come in to this topic with so many preconceived ideas about the Anunnaki, and there is a lot of disinformation that's out there regarding it. So what is what are your thoughts on it?
But, okay, the part about that technology that the Yankee had was so advanced that they were able to transmit through the clay tablets and a thing called cylinder seals. A cylinder seal is a 1-inch tall piece of stone that's been ground into a cylinder shape, and then engraved in the outside surface are negative images, so that when you roll the stone, which is made of hematites, it's hard as steel, so it's very difficult to carve in a negative or carve in any way. You roll this negative image across a piece of clay, you get a picture story. And in that way, they were able to show what they looked like. In other words, these are valuable information transfers to us that show physically pictures of what they were doing and what they think. And therefore, I think that the story, as concise as I can put it, was, according to Sitchin, that over 400,000 years ago, they came to this planet and colonized it. Their planet was captured into our solar system. It was free-floating in space, and it came by Neptune's gravitational field and pulled it in to Sitchin clockwise. And as it passed through the center, it collided with the fourth planet, which was called in the translations, and cut it in half. And then it went out into a 3,600-year orbit way out past the Oort belt and comes back every 3,600 years and repeats the path, which is between Jupiter and Mars. And in that collision, since this fat, watery planet, Tiamat, lost half of its mass, it created a new orbit. It became the third planet from the sun, which is our Earth. And if you drained all the water off the planet, you'll see there's a big hole in the Pacific Ocean where the results of this collision. So they were an advanced civilization. They probably were 9 feet tall, according to the translations. They were humanoid looking, and they, according to the pictures that we see of them on the cylinder seals, and their planet had a problem. It's like a spaceship that goes way out past the sun, and they had burned a hole in their ozone, in their atmosphere. They created an ozone leak, and they were losing their atmosphere. And they tried all means and manners to preserve themselves, because if they lost their atmosphere, their civilization had been kaput, as it were. So they discovered that flaking gold into the ozone leak would seal it, help heal it. The sun would reflect out of it, and it would heal itself. And they didn't have any gold on their planet. The mission was come to Earth. They did a survey of the inner planets and found that we had gold. And their mission was they came to planet Earth to retrieve gold to send back to their home planet, which was called Nibiru, to seal the leak in the ozone and save their civilization. There were 50 heroes that arrived in the first spaceship, and the story is fascinating. I repeat parts of it and most of it in the 4 books. Continues on throughout the 400,000 years since they first landed on Earth. That's basically the story.
Well, to me, it's a definite fascinating story. I love the idea in it, and I'm a big science fiction fan. I'll just say that right away. So, it definitely always has fascinated me just from the beginning when I heard it years ago. It got me kind of started in a pathway of examining what our history really is. And, regardless of whether or not people really understand this or not, We human beings have been lied to all along about who and what we really are. And there's no doubt about that.
That's true.
You know, there really is no doubt about that. What we are, who we are,
right.
You know, we may not really know for sure or be able to say 100% certainty, but we can at least know that much of it. So I finally guess the idea of...
It's like all my life.
Go
All my
ahead.
life I was searching for that answer, Ira. I wanted to know who we were and where we came from. Now, there's certain answers I was able to dig up out of these deciphering of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals, and it helped solve my problems. And the one remaining problem, which I don't think anybody's ever going to solve, is, you know, where did it all come from? Where did the universe from? Where did the Anunnaki come from? Who created the Anunnaki? Those are still unanswered questions.
Do you think that we're ever going to find out? I guess that'd be a good question.
That's a good question, Ira. I hope so, but you know, as I studied the civilization that they had, you know, in the translations that Zecharia gave us, there's a lot of history of the Anunnaki back on their home planet and how to solve their problems and so forth. But the one thing that's really stuck in my head is that if indeed they are a million years more advanced than we are, they still didn't answer all the questions because a deity called the creator of all. In other words, they don't know where the universe, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think they know where the universe came from, and they have certain rules that they abide by, and those rules are some of the rules that we've been given in our civilization.
Okay, we're really having a lot of Skype issues tonight. I don't know what it is.